Hello all, and welcome to a new video series that I may be starting called Backfires, where I examine some of the stupidest, nonsensical, baffling, and stuff that just doesn't make any sense in video game story writing. What I consider for this series, if it goes well, is that the topic has to first fail in making sense in its own universe, or something that wasn't thought out well and leads to comically terrible plot holes. Today, we're going to tackle what I think is one of the big Mac Daddies in video game plot failure, and that is the premise to the campaign of Call of Duty Ghosts. When originally planning this video type in my head, I knew I wanted this to be the first topic because it's so badly conceived and blatantly racist that it ruins a large part of the game, since the entire campaign is built off of this shoestring threaded through the logic of a mad conspiracy theorist. Unlike my other videos that were more broad strokes, for this series I went back and looked at the cutscenes closely, the plot synopses, to really get a handle on what went wrong. Like all terrible stories, let's begin at the beginning. I tried to figure out an exact time that the game takes place, but the closest I can come to is around 15 to 20 years past our present date. According to Ghosts, the step into the future was enough time for the oil-centric economy of the world to collapse and for South America to essentially become the next OPEC. Ghosts made that sound like it would take a very long time, but considering the world's dependence on oil, I would see that a new OPEC-styled operation would be up and running effectively within the next decade if the old OPEC was obliterated by a nuclear warhead strike. It's simple. OPEC is not the only oil-producing nation in the world. The world needs oil. The world will go to where the oil is to buy it. So already, Ghosts has fallen at the first hurdle. Like, this is literally the first thing that the world building in Ghosts is trying to establish, and it is already fucked that up. You want to know who has oil? Russia, China, Canada, and Brazil. The biggest oil producer in Latin America is under all of those on the scale, and that's only going by 2013 numbers. In 2017, the United States has become a top dog in oil production since we found a lot more of it, which again adds in more plot holes to what Ghosts is going for later in the intro. The ultimate problem with what Ghosts wanted to be was that it wanted to set itself in an alternate timeline that spun off of our current reality when an unnamed country somehow launched a nuclear Armageddon that reduced the entirety, all of the Middle East countries into a zero population state, which is just completely ridiculous. Even if that happened, there is no way to completely annihilate an entire country all in one shot. There's just no way. That doesn't happen. Ghosts wants to be set as close to literal reality as possible, and therefore the whole "it's just a video game" excuse doesn't work. If you want to have this alternate reality thing work, then you have to establish in-universe rules and explanations to have it make sense. You have to establish why the world that is based off of our world is different. You can't just say that stuff happens and then because it's all science fiction. If you do that, then it's bad science fiction. Moving on, bold as brass, in the alternate reality, the loss of the entire oil market, which apparently wasn't replaced by the rapidly expanding alternate energy options that exist now and would further accelerate in an oil-deprived world, caused all of the currently existing superpowers to totally collapse, also known as America, and only America, because other oil-richish countries like China and Russia are excused from existing in Ghosts' alternate reality. With this power vacuum, because we're just ignoring the other superpowers that exist in the world, the 9th and the 12th richest in oil countries, Brazil and Venezuela, sell their oil to countries that are looking for oil so that they can gain the power to become the Federation. And are you motherfucking kidding me with this garbage? Okay, so let's run that back. The world's oil supply gets completely detonated. The superpowers of our contemporary time collapse because they lost their oil supply. The Federation rises because it's the only source of oil left on the planet. Who bought that oil? Who bought the oil that the Federation was selling so that it could exist as a tyrannical bloc? The old superpowers! America would be the country buying the Federation's oil to continue existing as a superpower, and therefore wouldn't have collapsed, leading to the power vacuum that would have created the Federation. Do you see why not thinking about your rules runs into problems? You've made this unsustainable cycle because it runs headfirst into common sense. You can't establish your in-universe rules because they get deleted by your own in-game history. It's a cyclical shit pile that can't get started because the event that starts it doesn't happen. And this isn't crap that I'm pulling off of Google to prove a point. This was established in the game itself, and it ends up being a plot hole against the rest of Call of Duty Ghost's plot. And if you want to tell me that the Federation rose because of something else that was caused by the complete detonation of oil, which was the only event that was the thing that spun off this alternate history, then what the hell does South America have that would have caused one of their countries to completely take over the 11 other ones that are around it? Because South America is not a hive mind. It would actually take tyrannical work to invade and conquer all of South America to put it into one country, and then that country was able to go up, annihilate the rest of Latin America and Mexico. What else does South America have before the split from alternate timeline to our contemporary reality that would make that possible? It has to be the oil, because that's the only event that is making this alternate reality alternate. They don't have the resources to do this otherwise. So it can be the only explanation, and yet that explanation doesn't explain their way out of the fact that the first thing that they try to write is a plot hole to everything else that they've written. Okay, so let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that somehow the Federation managed to sell all of its oil supply to aliens, or they somehow discovered a massive 300-mile wide gold pile somewhere in the middle of South America that funded their conquest of the entire continent, and that's how they funded their tyrannical government that ended up taking over everything. The Federation coalesced itself sort of peacefully, but not really, because you can't have a tyranny that is continent-wide over a dozen countries without there being some sort of conflict, because again, these countries aren't a hive mind. They're actually distinct from each other, and they have different goals and aspirations. But then we run into something else. The Federation, which is comprised of mostly oil-poor nations and simply poor nations that have already lost a lot of resources from being unwilling-ish members of a psychopathic terrorist country-state thing, manages to lead a campaign of death, destruction, and invasion across Latin America and Mexico. Mexico, which as a country has close to the same amount of oil as Brazil. Since Mexico has access to oil, which again is the only thing that's important in this alternate reality, they would be able to defend themselves from the Federation, and yet this coalition doesn't aim their death laser cannon from space at Mexico. They aim it at the apparently collapsed United States, which would have been an easier target as a weakened oil-poor country, since in the alternate timeline, they didn't discover their newfound oil region we have today. So, using Call of Duty Ghost logic, if Mexico has a similar amount of oil to Brazil and Venezuela, they would have been harder to push down than the United States. And yet Ghost wants to say that the entirety of Latin America was as easy to brush off as an empty can of beer on my desk. Okay, fine, let's go on and get to the juicy bit. The big shit kicker, the Odin attack. First of all, if the United States collapsed as a superpower when compared to the Federation, why would the Federation spend the money to enter into the space race and get to the Odin module? Second, if the United States was able to see the Federation forming and becoming a more effective version of Hitler's Germany, and had access to the Odin module, why didn't the US fire it at the Federation in a part of a counterattack to disrupt the country's advance of power? Those are just some easy questions. My main issue with the Odin part of the story is that this thing is supposed to be the crux. the penultimate knife slitting that leads to the US being invaded wholesale by Federation forces to the point that it's basically annexed the entire right hemisphere of the planet. In my playthrough, the Federation had control of the Odin module and was firing missiles at America for around a half hour before the station imploded. If the Odin could liberally fire a missile every 15 seconds, that is a total of 120 missiles shot at the United States, and that is a heavy estimate. If you want to be more conservative, then you can say every 20 seconds, which is reduced down to 90 missiles fired. Later in the game, we get to see first-hand experience of one of the missile's craters, and I would say that a liberal estimate of damage would be around 75 square miles of destruction. That is one crater. Add that all together, and even keeping in mind that the Federation was specifically targeting major cities with Odin, and you can see what the problem is. No matter how you slice it, no matter how you add it up, there is no possible way that the Odin assault would have been the crippling blow to America that would have allowed the Federation to take it down with little resistance. There is no goddamn way it works. Even if you account for the crater being 100 square miles, that's only 9 to 15,000 square miles of land being destroyed in total. To be fair to Call of Duty Ghosts, that amount of damage would be enough to destroy maybe 50 to 75% of major US cities, since New York City is 300 to 400 square miles. Sacramento and Chicago are 100, so it's technically possible, but that leaves all of the unimportant bits of land scattered everywhere in America. No wait, it actually doesn't work at all, because Odin missiles were striking random suburban areas in the intro to the game, so you'll also have to cut down that 9 to 15,000 since the Federation did not hit 100% of their assigned targets. America has a total population of 300 million and change. Slice that however you want. You could cut the population down to 100 million, and that would still be a fighting force ready to take on the Federation, which as a tyranny would have some issues in developing proper morale, basic tactics, and simple support from its own population that would be dealing with the dissent problem that would come from a country so akin to Nazi Germany or Stalinist Russia. Seriously kids, Google the Holodomor. That is some royally fucked up hell that actually happened in the real world. Here's the other half of why the Odin strike would actually not cripple America, and even the oil shortage wouldn't manage that. It's because America is one of the most, if not the most, militarily built up nations on the planet. We have tanks, bases, planes, and all sorts of what have you everywhere on the planet. Even a lot of places where we probably don't even need it. The Federation would not be able to touch us. Hell, we have nuclear silos built into the middle of our country. That stuff does not get hand-waved away by an oil shortage. It's not like America had a fire sale going on military jeeps to other countries after the oil market collapsed. So it's all still there, ready to be used, and even if you want to say that the Federation also targeted all of America's military bases and ports, just to name a fact, America has 60 domestic Navy facilities and 20 Marine facilities, add to that over 100 Army bases, and the Federation has completely lost this entire game. You can't hit all of the major cities in America and all of our military installations with 100 missiles. Hell, you probably couldn't even do it with 200 missiles. And that's double my earlier estimate. And that was just done for no reason. And if you remember the earlier plot hole about the Federation selling oil to America to start its ascension to tyranny, then you have this entire formula that ended with the Federation funding itself by arming its eventual enemies. If you want to go just by the pure numbers, South America in total has over 400 million people compared to our 300 million, not counting the crippling from the oil collapse and the consequences of a tyrannical government that would reduce those numbers naturally. Brazil's army has 380,000 active members and Argentina has 51,000 actives, while America has 1.5 million active members. It is difficult to estimate the numbers of the alternate timeline armies because of so many variables that are in place with this scenario that aren't explained, and even then the number itself might not matter due to the military complex of America and the amount that killing machines could make more efficient in the killing of human beings. However, the Federation would have been building its military might as well, but again, since they are starting from a baseline of less than 35% of America's military power during that 10-year rise to power, could they have formed a comparable military by the time they invaded Latin America, Mexico, and eventually the United States? Remember that Mexico's military, which they completely brushed off in the intro to this game, is just under 300,000 active members. And they had to be invaded a lot sooner than America to open up that door, so what they lost and gained from those factors also into the equation. Even if this doesn't end up being a ridiculous plot hole, the whole scenario is so poorly thought out that it leaves all of these questions wide open. Who did what? How did they do it? Why did they do it? Where did this sandwich come from? Wait, I know the answer to that. America as a collapsed superpower isn't the trophy that it used to be, so why is the Federation spending all this money, effort, time, and probably self-respect trying to take it? It has nothing to offer you that would have been worth the military campaign that has been driven so that you could have it. This is why Ghosts is such an embarrassment to the franchise that is a constant embarrassment every single year. It's not that all of this happened, it's because it all happened with the intention of forcing South America into an antagonistic role as ham-fistedly as possible, to the point that the attempt is mired in so much stupidity, plot holes, and racism that it is so naked in its aspiration that even the 12-year-olds who play these games could see that it's not 100% on point. Infinity Ward wanted to have its moral complexity cake and eat it too, but forgot that those things actually take quite a lot of effort to write, because you have to think about the implications of not only the antagonist's actions, but also the protagonist's actions and everyone's position in the story that would be affecting their motivations. So rather than taking the time and care to craft a story that is robust enough and with enough explanations to actually have a South American tyranny villain make sense, Infinity Ward's writer's room just slapped South America with a post-it note reading "villain" misspelled on it, and set to developing a justification for that in such a slapdash manner that even the in-universe explanation for why it happened is a paradox. And from there, the terrible world building simply poisoned the rest of the game, because why the hell would I want to fight the Federation as a game player? They are here for literally no reason. There's nothing for the player character to personally gain from their guerrilla counterattacks other than vague revenge, and there's really no villain in the game because the player is fighting a country and not a person. If there's no face to be put on this meandering shell of a tyrannical douchebag, then how do you expect one person to take down the entire thing? I know that at the end of the game the player is given free reign to reign free with their own Odin strike on the Federation, but even then there's not enough missiles in the universe to take out an entire continent. The player character might as well sit down on the cockpit, stick the muzzle in their ear, and end this total waste of a first-person shooter. Infinity Ward totally shat the bed with its golden opportunity to prove that they still knew what they were doing after the Modern Warfare conclusion, and is proceeding to continue its downward spiral after they thought Infinite Warfare's release was actually a good idea in the bounds of reality. So, I do hope you enjoyed this introductory video to Backstory Backfires. If you want to suggest anything that I haven't heard about, then you have the comment section right below this video. I'll probably put together a special intro for this series when I have the time, but for now I do like this format. It's going to be a lot more analytical than my normal reviews, so just a little warning there in the future. This is basically what I'm hoping for this series to be. A look back at some truly awful story writing decisions that heavily affected the game overall, or just plain don't work on any metric, and looking at the many in-game and possibly realistic reasons why the plot element doesn't work. I do this because I'm a story-oriented gamer, I like going through the narrative, so when the narrative fucks up, it truly ruins my enjoyment of the game at least a little bit. I've got a list going through my head of other examples, so if this series works out, then we'll be doing more videos. Thanks for coming, and as always, here's a victory for gamers.